Hello there, PAX. Welcome to our panel, Proper Care and Feeding. That's the wrong panel. Would you believe? Would you believe I had the wrong notes up? I would. Welcome to our panel called Box Text Brawl, Writing Better Adventures. My name is Shawn Merwin, and I am here with the one and the only James Introcaso.
Yes, and I am James Introcaso, and I am here with the one and only Shawn Merwin. We are about to throw down the Box Text Brawl. After this panel, all future RPG products will have to have box text or not based on what we decide, and previous products will have to go back and wipe out or add box text appropriately.
All the way back to 1974 that this is going to affect. So we have to work on our time travel first, but that's something I'm sure once we get this settled, the time travel will be no problem.
No problem whatsoever. Yeah, it's going to be fine. We've got this under control for sure.
So before we start to throw the haymakers here in this battle, I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Shawn Merwin. I have been an RPG freelancer for, close to 20-some years now. I've worked in D&D as well as other RPGs. Most recently, for Wizards of the Coast, I contributed to the Descent into Avernus product and the Acquisitions Incorporated D&D hardcover.
Yes, my hat is off to you. That is probably the best written D&D hardcover out there. I really love the Ack Inc. hardcover. It's got such a good tone of voice and is really, really great. I love it.
Yeah, it was fun to work on because it's a much different product than anything that's that I've worked on in the past. Let's put it that way. And you know what's in there, James? Box text. That's all I'm saying. So could you tell us a little bit about you, James?
Yes, I am James Introcaso, and the crusade against box text started nigh on 7 years ago. So I am a podcaster and blogger and game designer. I also worked on Descent into Avernus, and most recently, I worked on the Mythic Odysseys of Theros book, as well as a couple other hardcovers. I work with MCDM, who I am repping right now on this shirt. And I am the creator of the Burn Bright RPG on Roll20.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is a lot of work done in a very short amount of time.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a true ride, and like you, Shawn, I have gone full time into this RPG freelancing thing. And I love it, and it also drives me up a wall. So
yes, that's true. And I just realized why you can write so much content in such a short amount of time, because you're not writing box text.
That's right. I just say, get it out of here, and then your product is like one page, right?
Exactly.
So it's important to note that where I stand in the box text debate isn't from a point of view that no box text, or I should say no descriptive text, is better than having descriptive text. I think we should have descriptive text. I do want to throw that out there at the beginning, but I think I'm going to say that I think your box text technology is outdated and needs an update. And I think we can get rid of paragraphs. You want to keep a box around that text? I'm fine with it. But let's get rid of soliloquies in our games that drive the players to check Twitter on their phone.
Gotcha. Yes. And I am of the opinion that while box text is not perfect, and even when it's well done, it may not be great, it is a technology that we need for our DMs to do the best job that they can when they run adventures. And James and I have, we're joking about it now. We've had some pretty serious discussions about box text in the past, privately, that has gotten not quite heated, but definitely beyond the jovial stage that we're at now.
Yes, tonight the gloves come off and one of
Yes.
us will be left bloody and
Mhm.
verbally beaten
Yes.
on the mat, and the other one will raise a championship belt. That is my
Yeah.
prediction.
I am.
And I think we did agree that the loser has to leave RPGs forever. I think was
It's
what
true.
we.
That's
Yeah,
true. And there was something about a haircut, but I'm beyond that. So
yeah.
we can just forget that.
Yes.
So
Yes.
so let's start right at the very basics.
Hmm.
What is box text and why is it there?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it, right? Box text is the text that you see often at the beginning of a section of an adventure, and then when you're in like a dungeon crawl, usually at the beginning of every room or every so often in a
Mhm.
new area, that sort of introduces the area, and the information in that box is
Mhm.
meant for the dungeon master or game master if you're not playing D&D to read aloud, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Or to paraphrase to give information to the players. So it's a signifier that says like, hey, when you're ready to start this section of the adventure, you need to give this information up front.
Yep. And the reason that it's called box text is because when the first adventure modules from TSR came out, they didn't really have the means to separate it in any way other than putting a nice little box around it. So hence the text in the box became known as boxed text. It's also sometimes called box text or read aloud text, or general other descriptions have been used to say what it is, but that's what we're talking about. Exactly what James said. So why is it there? Why was it there in the first place? Really, the reason that it's there is because one of the things that a GM or a DM in D&D needs to do is set the stage for the players. The players cannot act or react until they have the information they need that they're reacting to. So the box text was put there to provide the DM with a way to easily describe the setting, create the tone for whatever that room or encounter was going to be, and sometimes provide the initial conflict or drama for whatever the encounter is going to be. So that's why it's there. It's there as a tool for a DM to be able to quickly and easily sum up the scene for the players and then allow the players to react to it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I'm going to let James talk a little bit about all the problems in the world with box text.
Yes, and I think you see this a lot with older adventures because people were still figuring out how box text worked, right?
Mhm.
And so I think one of the big things that you can see with, and I think we often in this debate, what comes up when people are speaking with me specifically, hater of box text, James Introcaso, that no, but there's good box text and then there's bad box text, and you're just used to bad box text, right? And so I think first we get into this issue of bad box text, which I agree. I think there are some best practices to keep in mind when writing any descriptive text, no matter how you're
Mhm.
formatting it.
Mhm.
And so long, right? Very lengthy box text that can get too flowery and too descriptive. Shawn, you had a great article on D&D Beyond that talked about this exact problem, where the
Mhm.
DM sits down to read a giant chunk of box text that's like 3 paragraphs and keeps getting interrupted by the players asking questions or making jokes or that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So I think when we get into lengthy box text, when we get into people who are describing things that the players don't necessarily need to know about, right? Like if you
Mhm.
tell me that a cave is dark and dank, I don't need a ton more description to know that it's dark and dank. You've already told me that, right?
Right. Right.
And so I think, if a GM has a group that loves that embellishment, the GM will go on to embellish themselves. So,
Mhm.
so I think that's one thing. The other issues are that even with short box text that is descriptive and concise, there's often a shift in attitude, right? That we go from, hey, we are players engaging with our GM and we're going back and forth, and we're having this exchange, to, all right, children, settle down. Father is going to read aloud to you now, and the GM pulls out, right, their box text, and reads it. And I think that is often a signal for a lot of players who maybe they're used to bad box text, right? And even when it's short and good, they tune out right away. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I think that signal is very important,
Mm-hmm.
because I think you're absolutely correct in the sense that when the DM is looking up at the players, there is this connection. When the DM then looks down, there can be a disconnection. And it can be a signal, as you said, for players to tune out.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is also, though, maybe it's a subset of players, maybe it's just what the players have been used to in their games. But sometimes I think it's also a signal to pay attention.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, that only works if the box text is good.
Right.
Right. As soon as it becomes burdensome, then there is that tendency, I think, to tune out. But I think that signaling, because presenting any sort of, whether you're talking about plays or television, right? We're all trained to answer to signals, right? We hear dramatic music on a TV show. We're trained to feel a certain way. Or we see a play and we watch a character move off into the spotlight by him or herself. We know there's a soliloquy coming, so we are trained to then focus our attention on that character. And I think role-playing games are a very similar medium, in the sense that we as DMs uh, can use signals to help the players move into a new mindset or a new section of the game. It's just a matter of training the players correctly and then reinforcing that training with positive steps as opposed to negative steps.
Sure. Sure. Or you could not train your players to have to do a new thing, right? Like maybe that is part of it, that we could expect less, as
Okay,
it were, by giving the GM better tools.
yes, but even then, there are steps in a game,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
And so, just saying roll initiative,
Mm-hmm.
you are kind of moving from one stage of a game to another.
I see what you're saying. Yes.
so
Yes.
so so it's not you can't make a seamless game in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
You can't make a game where the players are always engaged the same way with every step of the way.
Yes, yeah, and I agree with that. Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that is also why descriptive text is important to have, because when you read a lot of adventures that forego it,
Mhm.
it makes the GM's life way harder, because they're like, okay, well, there's all this information. How do I know what to tell the players up front that they really need to know at the
Right,
start of entering this room, coming to this castle, whatever it may be, right?
right.
And I think that, when we talk about the problems too, right, the other problems that we see are telling the players how they think or feel, or how they
Mhm.
act, right? So that idea of, like, as you step forward in box text, you are
Right.
telling the players that they're stepping forward, that their characters are doing this, and maybe that's not happening, or that they feel terrified. Well, maybe the character doesn't feel terrified because maybe they're a
Right.
paladin who's immune to fear, or
Right.
maybe they really love hell for some reason, right?
Right. Yeah. Right. And that was part of my article
Hmm.
on D&D Beyond was, this bad box text moves the characters when they might not want to move. It tells them what they see when they might see things differently than another character. It tells them, like, if you say, your skin crawls with terror, you're just making so many assumptions that A, they have skin. What if they're a warforged? You know,
Hmm.
B, that they feel terror, as you said. All of these things, you are taking away their. It's not quite agency, because I think agency means movement or agency means choices, but you're taking away their role playing abilities, their characters core
Yeah.
when you use all these things. So for sure that is something where box text can totally go horribly wrong. Uh, and the other point you made about being longer than necessary is also totally true.
Mhm.
When you write box text, you really have to distill it down to the essence of what is the most important thing. Not even important thing. What is the most important thing?
Mhm.
Because the box text is kicking off a new scene in the game, a new part of the game, and you can rely on the DM to bring it together. You just often can't rely on the DM, and I say this as a DM myself, to make sure all the key points get mentioned at the correct times.
Right. Right.
Uh, because even something I've written, if there's not a good piece of box text there, I will forget that, oh yes, and I forgot to mention that pit in the middle of the floor.
Right.
uh as the barbarian says, well, I rushed I charged the wizard who's casting a spell. Oh yeah, did I not mention that there's a 40-foot pit between you and the wizard? Yeah, that would have been important to know before you all started planning your combat. uh, and so I think that's something where a DM's preparedness is important, but DMs are human,
Mhm.
most of them, unless you're an AI. Uh, and you need that help, and that's where I think we as adventure creators can give that help using something like box text, if not specifically box text.
Totally, totally. And I 100% agree with that. And I think that's why it's so important to have some form of descriptive text. It really is a struggle to be lost. And GMing is such a hard thing to do, right? You're taking on a lot of responsibility when you do that. And so
Yeah.
giving people the tools, I think, adventures that are well written, right? And I'm not talking about like, oh, what a great plot twist in there. I think those are great to
Mhm.
have too.
Mhm.
But the best adventures are the ones that I think are functional, right? That a GM can pick up at the table and play a lot of fun with, because a role playing game always has surprises, whether or not they're written into the adventure, right? The
Mhm. Mhm.
dice are going to surprise you. The player characters are going to surprise you. And that's really, they're driving that story, right?
Mhm.
And so I often think that. We should be giving the GM the tools to facilitate that. And I totally agree that descriptive text is a big part of that. And I also think, when I think about, right, telling players how their characters feel.
Mhm.
I get the impetus behind that, and I've done that in my career, earlier in my
Sure.
career, right, with box text. In fact, I think probably with you, and you were like, "Hey, don't do this."
Yeah.
So thank you for teaching that, right? And the idea that, like, you can still evoke fear
Mhm.
or excitement or whatever you want with descriptive text, but it should be through the words, right? When you
Right.
read a horror novel, Stephen King doesn't say, "And now you, the reader, are terrified."
Right.
He writes things that are scary, and
Yeah.
so that's how that goes. And so I think that's what it's going to be stronger. Your writing will be stronger if you don't tell characters how they feel. I try to avoid you, like the
Yeah.
second person, entirely when I'm writing
Yeah.
descriptive text.
Yeah, I that's one thing I've been writing about box text for probably 15 years. And one of the very first things I said was, if you want to write really good, evocative but useful box text, don't use the word you in box text. And I received a lot of negative feedback on that, specifically from old time adventure writers
Mm-hmm.
who said that's ridiculous, right? Because they've always done it. So why, me 15 years ago, being the young whippersnapper I was, uh, telling them how to do it better. And if you're used to writing box text and you're used to using you,
Mm-hmm.
you see this. you move here. If you eliminate you eliminate that second person, all you're left with is the ability to describe things that are happening outside of the characters. And that's where you are now writing more like fiction than like a director, because you don't want to be the director. The DM is the director, right?
Mhm.
You're just writing the script.
Exactly.
And I think your point, James, about using that evocative language to cause fear rather than telling them they're afraid, it's a great point. But that's where that fine line comes
Yes.
between being an adventure writer and being a novel writer.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you can keep it short and you can choose the exact right words, then you're doing it well. If you start rambling off and describing things in too much detail, or taking too much time describing what the NPCs are doing and not letting the characters interact with them, then you're in trouble. So almost write poetry rather than fiction
Yes. Yeah.
when you write box text.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think of it as, and I come from I used to write, I still do write television promos, right,
Mhm.
which are commercials, and so they say you have 30 seconds, 15 seconds, 10
Mhm.
seconds, right? You have a poster and you can put one line of copy across it, that kind of thing. And that's really helpful for how do I make the most evocative thing I can with the least words possible, right? And
Mhm.
so I think of it as writing advertising copy, right? You're
Yeah.
advertising this area of adventure to your players,
Yep.
and so yeah, and I think poetry is a great way to think of it too, right? How can you keep in mind these guidelines about box text, about keeping it short, about
Mhm.
keeping descriptive text evocative, without going into here is my Stephen King novel that
Mhm.
you need to read before you play the adventure.
Yeah. And the example I love to use with that is uh the characters walk into a room and there's a statue with red eyes, uh opals or rubies, something red.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're trying to get across to them is what's there and why may it be important.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, if you go on for 20 sentences describing the statue, they're going to lose focus. But if you say in front of you is a granite, or don't say you, right? There is a granite statue with fiery red gems that act as its eyes.
Mm-hmm.
By using the word fiery, what you are doing is drawing attention to that in a way that you want the players to think about it. Because say there are traps there, you without having to describe wires or all anything else, you say fiery red gems as eyes. Now they're thinking fire. So you are condensing everything that you're trying to say down into one word. Oh, if they and they may not consciously think there may be a trap here because he said the word fiery. But when they hear fire, subconsciously, they may say, "Oh, there's something wrong here. There's something different here. Let's check that for traps." Now you are using one word to put people in the right frame of mind to interact with this encounter in the way that you as the encounter designer intended.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so that's why I think box text is important for you to get across points like that without the DM having to do that heavy lifting.
Yes. Yeah. And I think I totally agree, right? Descriptive text one word can make a difference of like, oh, okay, this is going to help us remember that, like, if you didn't say fiery, I may not have thought traps, and I may not have, we may have blundered into that, and the same way we blunder into every room and not realized how unique it is,
Right.
right? And I think that I agree with everything right now that is being
Mhm.
said.
Mhm.
I'm setting this up because I think the even when it's short, right? The idea of box text is like, oh well, people can just paraphrase this, and I think that. If you've got the kind of group who isn't going to like this or that sort of thing, and I have a couple of different issues with that I know we're going to get into when we start talking about bullet points which is my preferred way of doing it, but I have like a very specific idea of how bullet points work, because I think if we look at something like Waterdeep Dragon Heist or Dungeon of the Mad Mage, which use descriptive bullets, I think that is not the way that I prefer to describe through bullet points. So I think that's also important, is like everything from box text to bullet points to other descriptive text methods have good and bad executions, I think. And I would much rather read an adventure with some of this really cool, concise box text than bad bullet points. So I think that's like an important sort of thing when I'm thinking about our Brawl right now, where we're headed, and also important for, I think, adventure writers to know that, like, if you're really, really comfortable writing box text and you write good box text, that's not a reason to abandon it then.
So what for you then is the best technology to get your point across with everything that we've talked about in terms of why it's important to have this descriptive text?
Yeah, so right now, and obviously things can change, things can evolve, people can evolve. By the end of this conversation, Shawn will have evolved and have seen things from my point of view, of course. And so my preferred method right now is descriptive bullet points. And the reason I like them is I think they overcome some of the things about box text that I don't like. So when I say descriptive, I think bullet points should be written with all of the same advice we just gave about descriptive text, right? They should be short. They should tell the characters what they need to know. They should be written to read aloud, right? A lot of times we see bullet points and they all start with the same word, and they, might go into like this stage is 3 feet by 6 cubits by 12 cubits, right? Like that whole thing.
Right.
And so I think you should keep in mind everything we've said and write your bullet points to be read aloud in order, boom, boom, boom. And then you also get a bunch of added benefits with them, right?
Okay.
And you can even put these bullet points in a box if that's going to help offset them. I am fine with that. But I think that the benefit you get with a bullet point is that they're easier to parse and paraphrase. And in talking to a lot of GMs, I know that when I have this debate with people, they say, well, I don't read the box text as is. I paraphrase. For me, I know it's easier. I also know that bullet points are easier for if people are like English is their second language and they're reading your adventure. I've had a lot of people say that this bullet point method is easier for them. And I also know for GMs who might be dyslexic, right? Bullet points with shorter information are easier to read than a paragraph out loud. So those are all reasons to begin with. But what I also like about bullet points is that the organization of information allows you to then, in your bullet points, also indicate hidden information that the GM should know about right away, but the player shouldn't. So like Shawn, in your example, when you talked about like, oh, I forgot to mention the pit because it's down here somewhere. Well, if that pit is hidden, and the fighter runs across the floor and starts attacking, and we're 3 attacks in, and I forgot about this hidden pit trap. Hang on, you should be down in that pit trap, right? If that is included in your bullet points, and you have bullet points maybe indicating with the bullet, possibly indicating with different text styling or whatever, hey, read the stuff that's in bold out loud. The things that are not in bold are information you, the GM, should know, but is hidden from the players when they first enter this room or come into this area, but it's important for you to know it. Then you can have it all up front, right? And then in your paragraphs below that, my preference is separated with headers, right? So like, hey, we mentioned the evil altar here. Then there's a header that says evil altar that then goes into more description about what happens when the players interact with the altar. We mentioned the skeletons here. Here's how the skeletons act when the players enter the room, right? That's kind of how I like to organize the information. And I think for me, as a GM, I like that better. So that's why I designed that way.
Yeah. What happens? See, I'm with you.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I like to do is use bullet points as if the characters are having a conversation with an NPC, I like to put that information in bullet points. One piece of information, um, one bullet point per piece of information. Uh, is it possible to have too many bullet points used in too many different ways?
So I don't think so, as long as you are keeping styling in mind, right? So like
Okay.
you have one set of bullet points, I think, that will be used in adventures for, hey, here's all the information the NPC gives them one at a time, right?
Mhm.
And that, frankly, that information could be written in a descriptive style to be read aloud, right?
Mhm.
Because it's kind of I've also seen people say, here's what the PC says, and it's box text. Um,
Right.
and so you could do it that way, but I think then saying like specifically our read aloud bullet points or our descriptive bullet points might have a different style. So it might be that it's the normal circle when
Right.
it's not information meant to be read aloud, but when it's
Okay.
meant to be read aloud, it's an X or a trifoil or something like that. A fleur de lis, if you want to get
Mhm.
super fancy.
Oh, ooh.
And maybe the secret information is, like a guy, an
Yeah.
icon of somebody going like this, so you remember not to say it to your players. So I think that, and granted, that changes formatting, right? Or maybe we put the
Mhm.
bullets in the box when you want to read them out loud.
Mhm.
So I think you do need to think beyond what we normally have for formatting now.
So really what you're talking about now is a completely new way of writing adventures.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Technically, right? I mean, you're talking about different layouts, different using using every single graphic design tool at your disposal. No, I
Yeah.
mean, yes, yeah, but that's what it is, and I like it. I'm wondering how um, I'm wondering how accepted it would be,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm wondering how much more it would take for people to publish adventures if they have to go through that.
Yeah, it's a good question. We're doing it in Burn Bright, the way we write
Mhm.
adventures right now, and we're not actually changing the bullets. What we're
Mhm.
doing is we're taking the descriptive bullets that you're meant to read aloud are italicized. And
Okay.
then the bullets that have secret information are presented in parentheses. Like the whole bullet point is
Right.
presented that way, right?
Okay.
And then regular bullet points are presented without italics or parentheses, and that has been working pretty well.
Okay.
I would say the big thing that we get is, and there's a fair number of publishers who put all their box text in italics as well.
Mhm.
Is that italics are hard to read, and I agree with that, right? Like if you're going to
Yeah.
sit down and read them out loud, if that makes it harder for you, then we shouldn't be doing that. So that's where this sort of new
Mhm.
technology, quote unquote,
Yeah.
comes into play. And I think one of the things that's really interesting is I've been playing around with Google Docs,
Mhm.
because Google Docs does have a bunch of different bullet points that you can use, just like Word does or anything else, that
Very true.
you don't need a graphic designer to necessarily come up with a bunch of different bullets. We already have them.
Mhm.
And so it's just indicating the same way a new GM has to learn what the box around text means. You have to
Yeah.
teach a new GM, it's just reteaching GMs. So that's sort of where I stand right now. And I honestly, I know that I am in a position where I'm like, I'm still playing around with it. But
Yeah.
I do like it better than what we have as far as box text goes.
Yeah. I mean, and it's I like the ideas,
Mm-hmm.
and I've lived through D&D and other RPGs, their evolution of content design, adventure layout, right? Because we went you know from third edition and earlier editions where it was in the text itself, you would get the monster's name, and behind it, you would get just their hit points.
Right.
Right. Then we're going to put the whole stat block in every page where this monster goes now. And then, like with fourth edition, we're going to end of third and beginning of fourth, we're going to go to this 2-page spread for every encounter. But then within the regular flowing text, we're just going to refer people to those pages. Right. So you're reading the adventure and you're going from place to place to place. And then it's like, see page 47 for this 2-page encounter block. So, and people loved that and people hated that. And then so they'd switch to something else, which people loved and also people hated. And so there's always this constant attempt to come up with a new format that works. And it always seems to come back to what we have now. Right. We go off and we try these new things, and then it comes back to where we are now. And so I'm wondering if that is a form of just inertia, where we come back to it because it's what we're comfortable with, or if we've tried new things and we've never been able to break through that, that whatever the barriers are, we've never been able to push them far enough that we've totally accepted the new way.
Yeah. I think, and I think it's all for different reasons. I think people, fourth edition, and I still hear people lament that we don't have sort of the encounter page, right, with stat blocks on the page and the battle map right there and the positioning of the creatures and everything. And that was a great way to run tactical encounters.
Sure.
But it's not a great way to save space in a book.
Exactly.
And so I think it's thinking about all of those different things, and also thinking about where will we change? Because I think the other thing that's going to start to happen, as is the way of all things publishing right now, right? We suddenly are going to have infinite space for a book. And I think that may change things as more and more people move digitally. Will we see, I'm wondering, like, at what point does the D&D Beyond and Roll20 version of these books look entirely different than what we have?
Well, yeah. I mean, why don't we just have the adventure writers reading the box text for you?
Agreed. For an extra fee, I would add.
Sure, of course. But and that is a great point, because right now I'm running an Acquisitions Incorporated campaign via Roll20, and I'm still flipping pages, right? Because I still need the adventure in front of me, and I still need the map up, and some of the things I can pull off of Roll20, but some of the things I still need to go back to the text itself, and have 5, 6, 7, 8, 20, 100 windows open with the monsters, because I'm clicking on the Roll20, or I'm clicking on the D&D Beyond monster to show the roll in Roll20 via Beyond 20, right? That link between the two.
Right, yes.
And so it hasn't become simpler. It's just become different. And we may be at a point where we have to accept that this is a complex thing that we're doing as writers, as players, as DMs. And there isn't one simple silver bullet that's going to solve our attention, space problem. We are stuck with having to use the executive functional portion of our brain, right, to manage several things at once in order to present this to players.
Yes, definitely. And I fully agree. And I think it's going to be, the future will be interesting to see if we continue to have the same issues play out on different platforms, right? Which is what's happening right now. Will there be one platform to unite them all? Will there be, especially when we look at the difference between something like a Roll20, which is built to, hey, come play a lot of games on this, versus a D&D Beyond, which is come play D&D, and so we are super optimized for just that D&D experience.
Right.
Is that going to change things when D&D Beyond puts out their virtual table, right?
Right.
And so I think it'll be, you know, and I know this is sort of a tangent that I've gotten off on here about technology, but this idea of the way that we write our text, I do think can be written in a way that can make people, make players and GMs have a better time engaging with the text. And I don't necessarily think the solution is, hey, every book comes with Matt Mercer reading aloud all of the box text, right? Although
Right.
I think the novelty of that at first would definitely intrigue people. I do think by the time you're running your fourth book and the GM hits play on Matt Mercer for the 40th time, people are going to be tuning out, just like they would for long box text. But I do think that if we can give GMs the tools to paraphrase and keep players engaged, and then also the tools to edit themselves on the fly faster, right? Like, oh, I don't want this to be a Hezru. I want this to be a Glabrazu instead.
Right.
Being able to do that on the fly, which I think again is easier with bullet points. I think engaging with your players is easier with bullet points because you are able to paraphrase and speak a little more naturally instead of going into sort of a didactic narration mode. And then having information up front that isn't meant to be read aloud, but is important to know up front. I think that's why, for me, bullets are, I'm not saying the way of the future, but the way I would like to write my adventures in the future. And that being said, right, like, you also got to stick with the style that you're in. So if I'm writing an adventure, Shawn, with you, I'm not going to write all my chapters one way and have you write the other way. Like, we're going to get together and say, how do we do this, and figure it out.
Right. Right. And either the publisher will set that standard, or or as you said, well, we would have to agree how we were going to do it. And I just want to mention all of you critters out there who are furious at James right now for saying that anyone would ever get tired of hearing Matt Mercer read box text. You can send all complaints to his Twitter account. At James Introcaso.
So listen, I love hearing me some Matt Mercer. Okay, I am a big fan, and I would get a kick out of hearing it. But if you have a player at your table who doesn't play Critical Role, and every time it's like, oh, let's all gather around my iPhone and hear the the luscious voice of Matt describe the room we're going into, I would be afraid that player would tune out.
Yeah, no, and I think that itself is your best argument against box text, right? Because if a professionally trained voice actor, beloved by millions of players for his NPCs and his creations, if even then people would get tired of that, what hope do we DMs have for getting players to listen to us?
Yes. Now, I will say, if Matt Mercer sang all of the box text, or maybe like a fun box text rap for each one, that would be fun. That would be challenging for us as designers to make that happen, though.
Yeah. How much extra prep does a DM need if we go away from box text? Do you think that it becomes more of a burden on DMs if they have to not necessarily parse your bullet points? Because I don't think your bullet point idea is actually much different than box text.
Agreed.
I think what you're talking about is generally one extra hit of the enter/return key when you're writing box text, right? It's just adding a little space. Yep. But if you go another way where it's not presented very easily for them, does the DM owe it to the players to prepare better? That's always a question that's on my mind, especially with Adventurers League, right? Because with Adventurers League, you have a time limit. You may be playing GMing for strangers. you may not have had a lot of time to prepare. So in situations like that, how much do we as writers owe it to DMs to make it easier for them, or how much prep should we expect them to do to get that information correct the first time?
Yeah, I mean, I think the expectation of an adventure writer should be, hey, my hope is you will read this before you run it, right?
Hmm.
Um, and I don't necessarily mean read through the whole adventure if it's a very long adventure that's going to take multiple sessions.
Hmm.
But I do think the expectation should be, I hope you read this section at least before you run it, and then you'll be able to run it out of the text.
Hmm.
I don't think we should be expecting GMs to rewrite things. I
Hmm.
don't, and if there are GMs out there who this helps them, and they do it all the time, I think that's
Hmm.
great. And I think
Yeah.
if that is part of your process and that helps you, by all means do it. But I don't think we as adventure writers should say, well, they're going to rewrite this anyway, and so
Right.
it doesn't matter how I present this. And
Right.
that's the big problem when there's no descriptive text there, right? Is that
Hmm.
we get into this. Well, then I had to, because I only had a 4-hour slot, and the adventure was already tight as it is. I wanted to go through. I made a million notes, and I did all this kind of stuff. And so I think that's where my mind is, right? Like we should not be asking GMs to be the designers of the adventure if we are designing an adventure.
Hmm.
What about you?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that when a DM, a GM buys a product, they should be getting everything they need to run that adventure.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely they shouldn't have to design. Um, and I don't think they should have to rewrite, as
Yeah,
like you said, if they do it, great,
totally.
because only they know their players. We don't as adventure writers. So I think that's great. But I definitely think that we should make it as easy as possible for them to run within reason. Yeah, and I think that's why it's been hard to pry box text out of its vaunted position, in adventures,
Mm-hmm.
uh, because it is so darn easy for the DMs to just read it and expect to have it do that work for them.
Agreed. Yeah, yeah, and that's why I also think box text is better than no descriptive text at all. Right?
Hmm.
I am running right now for my gaming group, Storm King's Thunder,
Hmm.
which has a lot of big dungeons and very very little box text, right?
Hmm.
And it doesn't have bullet points either, unlike something like Dragon Heist or Dungeon of the Mad Mage, which we mentioned, have bullet points that are not necessarily written to be read aloud, and but they have information up front that you need. It
Hmm.
is There's a lot of like, okay, we're going into a new room. It's a good thing this is a giant door that's going to take you forever to figure out how to open, so I can read this six
Right.
paragraphs of stuff.
Yeah, yeah, and that's stuff. I remember in third edition D&D days writing for a living campaign, and I did not write box text
Hmm.
because I was at the point where you are now. Right. I was sick of box text. I had been editing a lot and DMing a lot, and the box text wasn't great and it wasn't doing what I wanted. And I said, I'm not going to write box text. So I turned in a full adventure with no box text, and the editor sent it back and said, please write box text. And I said, yes, sir, I will do that.
Hmm. Yeah,
Because yeah.
that happened to me with Descent into Avernus, because I had worked on
Mhm.
Dungeon of the Mad Mage, which was bullet point style, and then the next thing I worked on was Avernus, and so I continued to use bullet point style, as did I think many writers,
Mhm.
and then we all got the note back that was like, actually. We found that box text is working better for our readers, and so can we do
Yeah.
that instead? Yeah.
Yeah, and they did a whole season of Adventures League, I think, that was coexistent with the season where they did uh, Dungeon of the Mad Mage and
Yes.
Dragon Heist, And I think all of those adventures did not have box text, and the DMs were not pleased.
I will note that those adventures also did not have bullet points. It was
This is true.
it had
This is
there
true.
were a lot of paragraphs of text, and I think
Yeah.
that was hard. And I will say, right, when the Eberron adventures that some very smart AL admins are putting together, when those started to come out, people were very happy to see a return to descriptive text. So I think, I think as much as you and I, as game designers, can get into the minutia of how should descriptive text be presented, I think we do agree, right, that there should be some descriptive text of some kind in adventures.
Yes, I think that without it, we are doing the DMs and GMs a disservice for what they're going to do, because as we mentioned, both mentioned, we do not want the consumers of our products to have to do the work that we should have done.
Correct. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And I think we also agree on how descriptive text should look, right? It should be short, it should be evocative, and it shouldn't be telling players how to act or feel.
Right.
We certainly agree on a lot of things here. So I guess neither one of us can really be forced to leave the RPG industry.
No, that's good, because I like eating, and I suppose that you do too.
I
Probably
do.
not as much as me, but
I like it quite a bit. I like it quite a bit. Yes.
Well, I think that I don't have much else. I feel a little bloodied. There are little birds flying around my head from the shot you got in. But I think we can call this a draw.
I think so. I think by judge's decision, you and I being
Yeah.
the judges and the competitors in this match,
Yeah.
we can say this was indeed a draw. And I look forward to next PAX Online when we debate 2-column versus 3-column format, which is
Okay.
best for RPGs. I think we probably agree there too that 3-column is terrible. Get it out of there.
Yeah, for anybody reading it on like a tablet, that's brutal. Yeah. Yep.
It really is. Really is.
That would be the shortest debate ever.
Yes, yeah. So this has been really, really fun.
Yeah.
Thank you, Shawn, for sitting down and chatting with me about it.
Hey, thank you for supplying all the brain power and recording power to bring this to PAX.
Well, thank you for bringing your brilliant brain power and supplying all of the admin and having this panel actually exist, which would not have happened if you hadn't spoken to PAX.
All right.
And thank you to PAX.
Yes, I hope that you are all enjoying your online PAX. We both, I'm sure, wish we could be there in person. Because PAXs have always been so good to us.
Yes.
But we make do with the hands that were dealt, and we read the box text we're given.
Exactly. So everybody, thank you so much, Shawn. I guess since we're headed out, where can people find you?
That's a great question. Thank you, James. People can most often find me on Twitter at Shawn Merwin. I do have a podcast, a weekly D&D podcast that I do with Teos Abadia called Down with D&D, which you can find on the Misdirected Mark Network if you search Down with D&D. You can also find my work on the DMs Guild. Just search Shawn Merwin. Or you can check out my work as an administrator of the Ashes of Athos. That's the wrong world. Wow. As the Eberron Oracle of War campaign for the D&D Adventurers League. How about you, James?
So you can find me on Twitter. I'm at James Introcaso. I blog about game design and the things that I'm doing over at worldbuilderblog.com. You can also check out the original role-playing game I created and the box text bullet points we were talking about over at burnbright.com. That's BRYTE.com. And I am also in places like the DM's Guild, where I worked on an Eberron Oracle of War adventure, and I did indeed include box text. And you can often find me playing great Eberron Oracle of War adventures. It is one of the best adventure paths, I'm going to say, ever written, Shawn.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
we can thank Will Doyle for that.
And you can also thank Shawn for the great formatting that you will see in there, and the presentation of everything. So so those are the places where I am. So also, by the time this comes out, maybe I'm the managing editor of a magazine called Arcadia that is distributed through the MCDM Patreon. That's Matt Colville's company, MCDM. So go check out the Patreon over there if you want to check out issues of Arcadia. It's either out or it's coming. We'll see.
The hardest working man in game design right there, folks.
That's right, Matt Colville, the hardest working man in game design.
Maybe the second.
Well, he comes second to you, sir. So my hat is off. Yes, so thank you all so much for watching.